She came home to find a cruel note glued to her front door. 4 words. I want a divorce. But instead of crying or begging, she left her own note. 2 words. House sold. And when her arrogant husband returned, expecting a broken wife, he walked straight into the humiliation of his life. Before we continue, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more stories like this. Now let's dive right in. The late afternoon sun was still warm when Margaret turned the corner of Maplewood Lane, a bag of groceries balanced in her arms. She hummed quietly to herself, nothing special, just a tune that made the walk home lighter. Her house stood at the end of the street, white shutters, tidy lawn, a porch swing Rowan had promised to fix years ago but never touched again. She smiled faintly, then frowned. Something was different. As she came closer, she saw it. A piece of paper, large, bold, stuck right in the middle of her front door with glue so heavy it dripped around the edges. The words written in black marker screamed across it, big and cruel. I want a divorce. Her breath caught. Not from shock, not even from heartbreak, just from the sheer audacity of it. Her husband, Rowan, had done many things in arrogance before, but this was theater. This was meant to be seen. From across the street, Mrs. Turner's curtain twitched. Old Mr. Bennet, watering his roses 2 doors down, froze with the hose in his hand, pretending not to look but failing miserably. Margaret could feel the street holding its breath, waiting for her reaction. She stood very still, her groceries heavy in her arms, her eyes fixed on the bold letters. 100 thoughts could have passed through her mind, rage, despair, confusion, but instead, a quiet calm settled in her chest. She bent slightly, set the grocery bag on the porch step, and stepped closer to the door. With a careful hand, she touched the paper, as though it were delicate. The glue stuck to her fingertips, but she pulled slowly, steadily, until the paper came free with a small tearing sound. She folded it once, then twice, then slid it into her bag as if it were a simple receipt, nothing more. The neighbors waited. Surely now she would cry, or scream, or fall apart. But Margaret only picked up her groceries again, unlocked her door, and stepped inside with a calm so steady it unsettled them all. Inside, the air was quiet, filled only with the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel. She placed the groceries on the kitchen counter, unpacked them, one by one, milk, bread, apples, her movements smooth and deliberate. She read the note again, smoothing the creases. Rowan's handwriting. Large, arrogant strokes, almost proud of themselves. So, this is how you end a marriage, Rowan? She thought. Not even a conversation, not even a word spoken face to face. Just a public performance, a stage for humiliation. Her lips curved, not in sadness, but in the faintest hint of a smile. All right, she whispered softly to herself, her voice steady. Then you'll see my reply. The house was quiet, but she felt as if the walls themselves were listening, waiting for what she would do next. The next morning, Maplewood Lane was alive with whispers. News traveled fast here, faster than the mail, faster than the wind. Someone had seen the note before Margaret took it down. Someone else claimed Rowan himself had posted it, smirking as he pressed the glue into the door. By breakfast time, everyone knew. Mrs. Turner, who lived across the street and had sharp eyes for everything, leaned over her fence to speak to her neighbor, Grace Miller. Did you hear? Rowan put a divorce note right on the door. Bold as brass. Mrs. Turner whispered, her voice trembling with both shock and delight. Grace frowned. Poor Margaret. Such humiliation. I always knew Rowan was proud, but this is cruel. Mrs. Turner nodded, lowering her voice further. I saw her face, Grace. I watched when she came home. She didn't cry. Didn't even look angry. Just folded it up and walked in as though it were nothing. Grace blinked. Nothing? If it were me, I'd have torn it to shreds right there in the street. That's just it, Mrs. Turner said, shaking her head. She didn't. And that, Grace, is why I can't stop thinking about it. She looked calm. Further down the street, Mr. Bennet muttered to his roses. Arrogant fool, that Rowan. always bragging about his success, his car, his money. Thought he was the king of this street. Mark my words, pride comes before the fall. By noon, the story had crossed into every kitchen and living room of Maplewood Lane. And yet, the one person everyone expected to collapse, the humiliated wife, was silent. Inside her house, Margaret sat at the dining table with a cup of tea. The note lay folded neatly beside her, no longer menacing, just paper and ink. Her phone buzzed. It was her friend, Claire. "Margaret, are you all right? I heard about the note." Margaret sipped her tea before answering. "I'm fine, Claire." "Fine?" "He glued a divorce notice to your door. For the whole street to see. People are talking." "I know," Margaret said simply. Her voice was calm, unshaken. Claire's tone grew heated. "If it were me, I'd march right to his office and—" "No," Margaret interrupted softly. "That's what he wants. A show. A scene. He wants me broken in front of the world. But I won't give him that." Claire hesitated. "Then what will you do?" Margaret glanced at the folded note, her eyes steady. "I'll answer him. Not with words. With actions. Something he won't see coming." Claire was silent for a moment, then sighed. "You always were stronger than the rest of us. Just don't let him walk away laughing, all right?" Margaret allowed herself a faint smile. "Oh, Claire, he won't be laughing." That evening, the neighbors saw her again. Margaret walked out onto her porch with a small basket of laundry in her arms, her head held high, her step steady. No tear-streaked face, no signs of rage. Just calm dignity. Mrs. Turner, watering her plants, called gently across the street. "Margaret, dear, are you all right?" Margaret looked up, her eyes kind but unshaken. "I'm all right, Mrs. Turner. Thank you for asking." The older woman hesitated, searching for words. I just want you to know, you don't deserve what he did." Margaret gave a small nod. "I know." Then, with a quiet strength that startled even Mrs. Turner, she added, "He thinks humiliation is power. He doesn't understand it can be turned back on him." And with that, she carried her basket inside, leaving Mrs. Turner staring after her, breathless. The street buzzed. Everyone had expected a scene, but what they saw instead was calm defiance. The kind of strength that whispered louder than shouting. And in their whispers, something shifted. Pity began to fade, replaced with respect. By the end of that night, Margaret sat at her desk with two numbers written on a pad of paper, her realtor's and her attorney's. Her hands did not shake. Rowan thought he had written the final word. But Margaret, calm and steady, was already preparing her reply. The morning light spilled gently across the kitchen table, catching the steam that curled up from Margaret's tea. She sat with a folded divorce note lying beside her like a chess piece moved too boldly on a board. Her hand brushed over it once, then reached for her phone. She pressed the first number she had written down the night before. It rang twice. "Good morning, this is Rachel from Willow Realty. How may I help you?" Margaret's voice was calm, steady. "Rachel, this is Margaret Hayes. I'm ready to sell my house. Immediately." There was a pause on the other end. "Oh, Margaret, good morning. Did you say immediately? I didn't know you were considering." "I wasn't. Until last night. But the house is in my name, and I want it listed without delay." Rachel cleared her throat. "Of course. We can schedule an appraisal, set up." "No need for long processes," Margaret cut in, though her tone remained polite. "It's a beautiful home in a desirable street. You'll have buyers within hours. Price it fairly and move quickly. I want the sign out front today." Rachel hesitated. "Margaret, forgive me asking, but this is sudden. Are you sure you're ready to let go of your home?" Margaret looked around her kitchen, her eyes lingering on the cabinets Rowan had mocked her for choosing, the dining table where he had once slammed his fist in anger, the walls that had carried so many of his prideful words. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm ready." Rachel drew in a breath. "All right. I'll personally see to it. We'll have the paperwork sent over by this afternoon." "Thank you, Rachel." Margaret ended the call without another word. Her hand lingered on the phone a moment longer. Then she dialed the second number. This time, a deeper voice answered. "Law offices of Richard Collins. How may I direct your call?" "Richard, it's Margaret Hayes," she said, her tone carrying no hesitation. "Margaret. Good morning. What can I do for you?" "I'll be filing for divorce. My husband has already made his intentions clear." There was silence for a heartbeat, then Richard's measured voice. "I see. Do you want to meet and discuss terms? We'll need to review the deed, finances, any shared accounts. The house is mine. My name only. I'll be selling it. Beyond that, Rowan can have his pride. It's all he ever cared for." Richard gave a low chuckle, not unkind. "You sound remarkably calm, Margaret. Most people who call me for this reason, well, they don't sound like you." She allowed herself a faint smile. "I've wasted enough years with shouting. I won't waste any more." "Very well. I'll prepare the documents. Do you want me to inform him formally?" "No," she said, her voice firm now. "He'll discover it on his own. That's how he chose to treat me, so I'll answer him in the same language he understands. Publicly." Richard hummed. "I think he's underestimated you." "He always has," she replied softly. When the call ended, Margaret sat back in her chair. Outside, she could hear the faint hum of a lawn mower on another street, the normal sounds of life going on. But inside, everything had shifted. The phone calls were not just business, they were the breaking of chains. Quietly, decisively, Margaret had turned Rowan's cruel stage into her own. She folded the note one final time and slid it into the drawer, shutting it away. The matter was no longer about pain, it was about reply. Across town, Rowan Hayes sat at the corner table of a cafe, his expensive watch glinting under the lights. He leaned back in his chair, sipping his black coffee like a man savoring victory. His friend Daniel sat across from him, uncomfortable but present. Rowan had insisted on meeting. "So I did it," Rowan said with a smirk. "I ended it. Bold, clean, unforgettable." Daniel frowned. "You mean the note?" Rowan's smirk widened. "Yes, the note. Right there on the front door. Large enough for half the street to see. You should have seen the look on their faces. Daniel. Shocked. Whispering. They'll be talking about it for weeks." Daniel shifted in his seat. "That seems harsh, Rowan. Why not just talk to her? Privately?" "Talk?" Rowan scoffed. "I don't talk, Daniel. I declare. That's who I am." Margaret needed to understand she was never in control, not for one moment. And now the whole neighborhood knows it. Daniel's lips pressed thin. "But, Margaret, how did she take it?" Rowan laughed, loud and sharp. "Oh, I imagine she folded like paper. Probably crying right now, calling her little friends for comfort. Let her. Everyone will know she couldn't hold me. That's what matters." Daniel looked away, discomfort clear in his eyes. He had always known Rowan to be proud, but pride was one thing. Cruelty was another. "Rowan," he said carefully, "don't you think this will come back to you somehow? People respect dignity, not respect." Rowan cut him off. "Respect comes from fear, Daniel. From power. I don't care if they like me. I care that they know I cannot be touched. Margaret is nothing without me. She'll learn that soon enough." Daniel said nothing more. But inside, he wondered. He had seen Margaret's eyes before, steady, calm, quietly unyielding. Something told him she was not as broken as Rowan believed. Later that afternoon, Rowan returned to his office, striding through the hall with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. His assistant, Claire, greeted him with a cautious smile. "Good afternoon, Mr. Hayes. Did you want me to clear your schedule?" "No," he said briskly, tossing his coat onto the chair. "Leave it. I'm in the mood for a productive day. Nothing clears the air like cutting off dead weight." Claire stiffened slightly. She had heard the rumors already. Everyone had. And though she said nothing, her eyes betrayed something Rowan failed to notice: quiet disapproval. Rowan poured himself a glass of water, humming. In his mind, he replayed the image of the note glued to the door, the bold letters for all to see. He pictured Margaret's shock, her tears. It satisfied him. What he didn't know was that while he bathed in his arrogance, Margaret had already set the pieces in motion. The house was being photographed, listed, prepared for buyers. The papers were being drawn. The very walls he considered his victory were no longer his at all. In Rowan's mind, he was the victor. In truth, he had already lost. The evening sun slanted across the living room, painting long golden stripes across the wooden floor. Margaret stood at the center of the room, a small cardboard box at her feet. It was strange, the act of packing. She had lived here for years, built memories in these walls, both bitter and sweet. Now, with each object she placed in the box, she wasn't just clearing space, she was reclaiming herself. The first thing she picked up was a framed photograph. Their wedding day. Rowan in a crisp suit, his smile wide and confident. She stared at it for a moment, remembering how proud he had looked, not of her, but of himself, as though marriage had been another trophy to display. Her lips tightened. She placed the frame in the box, face down. On the mantel sat a crystal vase Rowan had bought on one of his business trips. He had bragged about how expensive it was, lectured her when she'd once placed ordinary daisies in it. "A vase like this deserves roses, Margaret. Not your cheap little flowers." She touched the glass, cold beneath her fingertips, then set it carefully into the box. With every movement, memories rose like ghosts. The time he had mocked her choice of curtains, calling them plain, just like you. The time he had silenced her at a dinner party with a sharp look, as though her words were unworthy. But instead of drowning in bitterness, Margaret felt lighter. Each memory that surfaced seemed to dissolve as soon as she placed the object in the box. It was as if she was stripping the house of his shadow, one belonging at a time. She moved to the bedroom. The closet was divided neatly, his side and hers. Suits, pressed shirts, polished shoes lined up in perfect order. Rowan's kingdom of pride. She ignored it and opened her own side, pulling down clothes and folding them into a suitcase. As she worked, she whispered to herself, not in sadness but in quiet affirmation. "You thought I would break, Rowan. You thought I'd crumble. But I am not built like you. I don't scream. I don't boast. I endure. And then, I move." The suitcase filled, the closet emptied. She zipped it closed and pushed it gently against the wall. The house around her felt quieter now, as if waiting. The tick of the hallway clock echoed louder than usual. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, her hands resting calmly in her lap. A knock sounded at the door, sharp, tentative. She rose and opened it. It was Grace Miller, the neighbor from 2 houses down. Grace's expression carried both pity and curiosity. "Margaret," she said gently. I just wanted to check on you. I hope I'm not intruding." Margaret smiled faintly. "Not at all, Grace. Come in." Grace stepped inside, her eyes darting around the boxes. "Oh, dear, are you leaving?" "Yes," Margaret answered simply. Grace wrung her hands. "I don't know what to say. Rowan, what he did, it was cruel. Everyone's talking about it. I just want you to know, we don't all believe his arrogance. Many of us, we respect you." Margaret's smile deepened, calm and kind. "Thank you, Grace. That means more than you know." Grace hesitated. "So what will you do now?" "I'll sell the house." Start fresh. Somewhere quieter. Somewhere mine. Grace's eyes widened. Sell? But this house. It's only bricks and wood, Grace, Margaret interrupted softly. It's not home. Not anymore. Home is where peace lives, and there's no peace here. Grace swallowed hard, her admiration clear. You're braver than most, Margaret. I hope Rowan realizes what is lost. Margaret's gaze was steady. Rowan will realize. But not because I tell him. Because he'll see it with his own eyes. Grace nodded, eyes shining, then excused herself. Margaret watched her leave, then closed the door quietly. She turned back to the half-empty room and felt something stir within her. Not despair. Not anger. But freedom, new and sharp, like the first breath after a storm. The next morning was bright, the air carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. Margaret stood at her window, watching as a white van pulled up outside. Two men stepped out, carrying a wooden post and a gleaming sign. They hammered it into the lawn with brisk efficiency, the sound echoing across the quiet street. For sale. The bold letters shone in the sunlight, impossible to miss. Curtains twitched. Doors opened slightly. Neighbors peeked out, their whispers rustling like wind through leaves. Mrs. Turner, across the street, nearly dropped her watering can. She hurried to her gate, her voice carrying across. Margaret, is it true? You're selling the house? Margaret stepped onto the porch, her expression calm. Yes, Mrs. Turner. It's time. But, Rowan. Margaret's eyes didn't flinch. Rowan doesn't own this house. I do. Gasps rippled faintly through the watching neighbors. Whispers turned into murmurs. The mighty Rowan Hayes, stripped of his claim, his prideful note turned to dust against the sign standing tall on the lawn. Mrs. Turner's face softened. Well, dear, I think that's the best news I've heard in years. Further down, Mr. Bennet set aside his watering hose, nodding approvingly. About time someone clipped that man's wings, he muttered, loud enough for others to hear. Margaret simply stood there, her hands resting lightly against the porch railing. She did not need to shout or explain. The sign spoke louder than anything she could have said. Cars slowed as they drove past, drivers craning their necks to read the sign. Children whispered as they played. Parents hushed them quickly but could not hide their own curiosity. The spectacle Rowan had created with his cruel note had turned against him. The humiliation he had meant for her was already unraveling into his own. Inside, Margaret received a call from Rachel, the realtor. Margaret, you won't believe this. We already have 3 interested buyers. People love the house, the street, the layout. I'll arrange viewings immediately. Good, Margaret said softly. Sell it quickly. Rachel chuckled. I don't think that'll be a problem. When she hung up, Margaret allowed herself a moment by the window. The for sale sign gleamed like a banner of defiance, a declaration not of loss but of freedom. And as she stood there, she felt the eyes of the neighborhood on her. But they were no longer filled with pity. They were filled with respect. That evening, as the street quieted, Mrs. Turner whispered to Grace Miller, "Did you see her face? Not a tear. Not a tremor. Just dignity." Grace nodded, her voice hushed. Rowan wanted her broken. But instead, he's the one who'll be broken. You wait and see. And behind her closed door, Margaret sat at her table, a small smile playing on her lips. Rowan had written his message on the front door. Now hers stood tall in the yard for all to see. Rowan's sleek black car glided down Maplewood Lane, engine purring like a beast fed well. He drove slower than usual, almost savoring the thought of pulling into his driveway. For days, he had imagined Margaret broken, maybe too ashamed to show her face, hiding behind the curtains while neighbors whispered about her humiliation. Let them whisper, he thought smugly, adjusting his cufflinks at the wheel. They all know who won. I don't lose. I never lose. The late afternoon sun cast golden light across the street. Children rode bicycles along the pavement, Parents chatted near their fences. But as Rowan's car approached, the atmosphere shifted. Neighbors paused mid-sentence, eyes flicking toward him. Some quickly turned away. Others stared outright. Rowan smirked. Yes, let them look. The man who couldn't be tamed. Then his eyes caught it. A bold sign planted firmly in the front yard. For sale. He slammed the brakes so hard the car jerked, drawing startled looks from the children nearby. His chest tightened, his smug expression faltered. No, he muttered. No, no, no. He leaned forward, staring at the sign as though if he squinted hard enough it would vanish. But the whiteboard gleamed defiantly, letters sharp and undeniable. Neighbors were watching him now. Some from behind curtains, others from porches. Their faces betrayed it, amusement, shock, even satisfaction. Rowan's jaw clenched. He opened the car door sharply and stormed up the driveway, ignoring the whispers. His polished shoes crunched against gravel, his hands fists at his sides. The house looked different. Curtains gone, windows bare. There was an emptiness in the air, a silence that felt louder than noise. And then, there it was. On the front door, in the exact same place where he had left his cruel note, another slip of paper was taped neatly. He ripped it free, his hands shaking. 2 words. House sold. The letters weren't scrawled in arrogance like his had been. They were written in steady, graceful script, clear and final. His throat tightened. His face flushed red-hot, then cold. The note slipped from his fingers, fluttering to the porch floor. Behind him, a door opened. It was Mr. Bennet, the old man with the roses. He leaned on his cane, squinting across the street. "Ah," Mr. Bennet said loudly enough for others to hear. "Seems the mighty Rowan Hayes lost his throne." Laughter rippled faintly from a group of teenagers gathered at the corner. A few neighbors exchanged knowing looks, some openly smirking now. The same people who once bowed under Rowan's arrogance were savoring the turn of the tide. Rowan spun around, fury burning in his chest. "What are you all looking at?" he barked. "Go back inside. Mind your business." But no one moved. Silence hung heavy, broken only by a whisper of laughter. Rowan turned back to the door, glaring at the fallen note. His pride, once so sharp, now cut only himself. Rowan shoved open the door, storming into the house he thought was still his. The emptiness inside struck him immediately. Shelves bare. Closets half empty. The faint echo of footsteps that no longer lived here. "Margaret!" he roared, his voice bouncing off the walls. From the kitchen doorway, she appeared. Calm. Steady. Not a tear on her face, not a tremor in her hands. "Rowan," she greeted him evenly, as though he were no more than a guest. His face twisted with rage. "What the hell is this? The sign? The note? You sold the house?" "Yes," Margaret said, her voice level. "I sold it. The house is mine. Legally. You knew that." Rowan's fists tightened. You made me a laughingstock. The neighbors, the whole damn street, do you know what they'll say about me?" "They'll say the truth," Margaret replied softly. "That arrogance is no substitute for love. That pride destroys itself." Her words landed like stones, sharp and heavy. Rowan stepped closer, his face inches from hers. "You humiliated me." She held his gaze, unflinching. "No, Rowan. You humiliated yourself. You chose to paste your cruelty on the door for everyone to see. I chose to answer with dignity." His breath came hard and fast. "You think you've won." Margaret's lips curved faintly, not mocking, not triumphant, but calm. "I wasn't playing to win. I was freeing myself." He stared at her, words caught in his throat. For the first time, she seemed untouchable to him. Not weak, not small, but untouchable. From outside, voices carried faintly, neighbors still murmuring, still watching. Rowan's pride burned hotter. The street that once feared his sharp tongue now mocked his fall. Margaret stepped past him, picking up a small box from the table. She moved toward the door, her steps deliberate. "Where are you going?" he demanded. She paused at the threshold, turning back one last time. Her eyes were calm, steady, shining with quiet freedom. "You once told me humiliation was power," she said softly. "But power built on pride crumbles. I don't need to humiliate you, Rowan. You've already done that to yourself." And with that, she opened the door and walked out. The neighbors turned their eyes toward her as she stepped into the sunlight. Some smiled faintly, some nodded with respect. She met their gazes without shame, her chin lifted, her step steady. Behind her, Rowan stood in the doorway, face red, chest heaving, the fallen note at his feet. The mighty man who had once ruled the street with arrogance now stood broken, mocked by the very community he sought to impress. And there, on the lawn, the for sale sign gleamed like a verdict. Margaret did not look back. The evening shadows stretched long across Maplewood Lane as the neighborhood slowly settled into quiet. But inside the once proud Hayes house, the silence was broken by Rowan's pacing. His footsteps thundered across the living room floor. His jaw clenched, hands balled into fists. The for sale sign still burned in his mind, and Margaret's calm face haunted him worse than any insult ever could. The front door opened softly. Margaret stepped in, carrying the last of her boxes. She placed it gently on the floor, straightened, and looked at him. Rowan turned on her like a storm. "How dare you?" His voice cracked with fury. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me? You've made me a joke, a laughingstock in my own street." Margaret regarded him steadily. "I did nothing to you, Rowan. You did this to yourself." His face darkened. "Don't twist this. I ended the marriage. I made the statement. That was my power, my choice. And you," he jabbed a finger at her, his hand trembling. "You stole my moment. You turned it against me." She took a step closer, her tone soft but unyielding. "No, Rowan. You thought humiliation was strength. You wanted me small, broken, so you could stand taller. But you never understood. Strength doesn't scream. It doesn't gloat. It endures. It chooses dignity." Rowan's voice cracked into a near roar. "Dignity? Do you think dignity will save you? I built this life. I gave you this house, this name, this street." Margaret tilted her head slightly. "This house was always mine, Rowan. You never even read the papers you signed. You were too busy bragging about your success. The name, the street, those were your trophies, not mine. I never needed them." His breath came ragged now. He slammed his hand against the wall, the sound echoing through the hollow rooms. "You'll regret this. You'll regret making a fool of me." Margaret's eyes didn't waver. "You made a fool of yourself. You wanted the world to see me weak, but they saw the truth instead. They saw your pride crumble." For the first time in years, Rowan had no words. He stared at her, his lips parted, his pride wounded deeper than he could bear. Margaret moved past him, her steps unhurried. She lifted the last box into her arms, her movements steady, graceful. Rowan's voice broke behind her. "Margaret, wait." She paused at the door but didn't turn. His voice lowered, almost desperate. "We can fix this. Forget the sign, the note. We can start over." Margaret closed her eyes for a brief moment, not in hesitation but in clarity. She turned her head slightly, her voice calm, certain. "You don't want me, Rowan. You want control. And when control slips away, you beg. But love was never here, not from you." Rowan took a step forward, reaching out a hand. "Margaret." She stepped out into the night, the door closing softly behind her. Inside, Rowan stood alone in the hollow house, the weight of silence heavier than his pride could carry. The next morning, the street was alive again. Children biked, neighbors trimmed hedges, Cars rolled quietly by. But there was a new hum in the air, one that carried Rowan's downfall like a story passed from ear to ear. On the lawn, the for sale sign gleamed under the sun. Beneath it, another smaller notice was pinned, under contract. Whispers spread quickly. Already sold. She didn't waste a second. Rowan never saw it coming. Inside the house, Rowan sat at the dining table, his head in his hands. He hadn't slept. Every knock at the door, every muffled laugh outside made his skin crawl. He could feel the weight of the neighborhood pressing down on him, not with respect, but with mockery. Once, when he had walked down Maplewood Lane, people had lowered their eyes, intimidated by his sharp tongue and cold arrogance. Now, they looked directly at him, some with pity, some with amusement, but none with fear. His throne had collapsed. The front door opened. Margaret stepped inside one final time. She wore a simple blouse, her hair tied back, her expression calm. Rowan lifted his head, his eyes bloodshot. "Why are you here?" "I came to collect the keys," she said gently. "The realtor needs them." He laughed bitterly. "Of course. Always business with you now." She walked past him, opened a drawer, and pulled out the small ring of keys. She paused, turning to face him. For a long moment, she studied him. The man who had once filled rooms with arrogance now looked small, his pride cracked beyond repair. "Rowan," she said softly, "do you see now? Pride isn't strength. It's a mask. And when it cracks, there's nothing beneath it." His lips trembled, but he said nothing. She placed the keys on the table, directly in front of him. "You wanted humiliation to be my cage. But it became your own. I chose freedom instead." Her words carried no venom, only truth. She turned and walked toward the door. On the threshold, she stopped and glanced back one last time. "Goodbye, Rowan." And then she left. Outside, the neighbors watched as she walked to her car. Some smiled, some nodded, all of them acknowledging the quiet strength she carried. Mrs. Turner whispered to Grace, "She didn't just leave him. She left with her dignity intact. That's rarer than gold." Grace nodded. "And now Rowan is left with nothing but his pride. And pride can't build a home." Margaret started her car. As she drove away, the for sale sign gleamed in her rearview mirror, the house shrinking behind her. For the first time in years, she felt the weight lift completely. Freedom. Peace. Dignity. Rowan remained behind, alone in the hollow house. The once proud man reduced to whispers and stares, mocked by the very street he had once ruled. And though he raged silently, though his pride burned hot inside him, he knew the truth he would never admit aloud. Margaret had won, not with fury, not with revenge, but with calm strength. And that's how Margaret walked away with her freedom, her dignity, and the respect of everyone who once pitied her, while Rowan was left broken and mocked by his own pride. If you want more stories of shocking twists, poetic justice, and unforgettable endings, make sure to hit subscribe and ring the bell, because the next story might just leave you speechless.